They could have very easily taken something like the Audi A8 and made it a little bit larger and called it a Mulsanne. Even if they came up with a new platform, they could have drawn on all kinds of engines, everything from a turbocharged Audi 8-cylinder to a V10 engine from the Gallardo or the R8. They could have detuned the 16-cylinder 1,000 horsepower Bugatti engine. I mean, they could have done a lot of things. And BMW, and that's what sort of BMW did. I mean, the Ghost, which is a Mulsanne rival, is really a 7 Series platform with a 7 Series engine. And I mean, successfully, turned into a Rolls-Royce, but it's still a BMW underneath. And with the Mulsanne, they didn't do that. They started from scratch. They would have felt that there were too many compromises. It's certainly, there's lots of engines in the family that could generate big horsepower. I mean, the Bugatti goes up to about 1,200 in the super sports versions. But all of that power comes with revs, and with the revs comes noise, vibration, harshness. And even though you can isolate that and do a pretty good job of it, you can't eliminate it altogether. And what you can't replace is the effortless low-speed torque. So the fewer number of cylinders, the bigger the cylinder, the longer the stroke, the more low-end torque that you have. It hurts it on high RPM because you've got heavier reciprocating and rotating masses. I mean, you can't get a almost an 8-liter V8 engine to spin that high, or at least it's very difficult to. And so the revs will limit the outright power. But this car would produce about 500 horsepower and about 750 pound-feet of torque. So the amount of power is ultimately a little bit less than the Continental, but the Continental has 500, well, just about under 500 pound-feet of torque, and this has 750. And of course, the power and torque are mathematically related, as you know, and basically the horsepower is the amount of torque times the engine revs. So a big engine with 750 pound-feet of torque, but turning slowly, will deliver the same amount of horsepower as a smaller engine developing less torque, but revving faster. But to optimize the low speed, tractability, and the effortless luxury, and as well, it's quite a heavy car, so to get that sort of instant sort of thrust off the line, the horsepower is less important and the torque more important. So they felt that the only way to do that was, and to keep the traditional Bentley DNA, was to keep that configuration. And so this is the same displacement and the same configuration as the engine that came out in 1958 in the Silver Cloud 2. Now, they wanted the engine more efficient, and they wanted the engine to produce better fuel economy, and they wanted it to produce less CO2s, and they wanted the Bentley owners to feel that at least the company was making some progress for environmental efficiency, etc. So although the configuration of the engine is the same, I mean, every part is different. I mean, for instance, in the 60s, or in the late 50s and 60s, when you had low compression engines and you had poor fuel, you had to take the engine apart and decoke the cylinder heads probably every maybe 10,000 miles or so. And also there would be a lot of sludge that would develop in the engine oil because of the poor fuel. And the crankshaft necessarily then would have all these large sludge traps in them. And this made the crankshaft extremely heavy. So if you have a heavy crankshaft and it's rotating, and you have high frictional losses, and you don't have an efficient engine. Well, now you don't need sludge traps on a crankshaft anymore because the engines are clean and the fuel is good. So they were able to take that crankshaft and probably chop about 30 to 40% of the weight out of it, and with modern materials actually increase the strength. They did make there are a couple instances of sort of right up-to-date technology. There's cylinder phasing in the engine, so it will imperceptibly cut out one bank of the V8 under light throttle conditions. You can't tell, but that'll save about 20% right there. And then there's also variable cam phasing. So of course, the cam phasing is you know, at low RPM, there's a certain optimum for the camshaft timing, the inlet of air and the exhaust and so forth. And at high RPM, there's an optimal cam timing as well. And if you just have a static timing throughout the rev range, then it's necessarily a compromise between a good idle and high RPM power. And that's why, you know, if you listen to a muscle car or something like that, at idle it'll barely, it sounds like it's going to stall because it has a very lopey idle. So when they changed the cam timing, Honda did this first with the VTEC in the 90s, the variable valve timing, and so the Bentley has a version of that for this car too. So they've achieved their, you know, 15% saving on fuel and CO2, despite a car that's larger and heavier and has a lot more creature comforts and safety in it than the old one. So there's progress in the car. Not that anybody who buys this car really cares about that too much, but it's nice to know they didn't gloss over some of the more difficult engineering problems.